chilling whispers and shadows of Shadowpine Hollow Trailhead. In this immersive ASMR horror story that will haunt your deepest fears and keep you on edge, you are listening to ASMR 404 Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The sun was sinking low behind the jagged peaks of the White River National Forest, and I pulled my jacket a little tighter around me because the wind cutting through Shadowpine Hollow felt like it was reaching straight into my bones. It was one those days where the forest seemed alive, not with birds or deer, but with something older, something that remembered every hiker who had ever stepped onto the trail. I parked my old pickup by the Trailhead sign, which was carved from rough timber, and read Shadowpine Hollow Trailhead in letters worn from rain and sun. I double-checked my pack one more time because I didn't trust the feeling creeping over me. Kind of feeling that makes your skin crawl for no reason at all. Path ahead was narrow and framed by tall pines that swayed like ghostly dancers in the evening breeze. I could hear the distant babble of a creek somewhere to my left, and the crunch of leaves under my boots echoed oddly as if the forest itself was listening. I had come out here alone for the quiet, the kind of quiet you can't find in town. Kind that lets you hear your own thoughts and maybe even things you weren't supposed to hear us. I started down the trail, the smell of damp earth mixed with the pine resin filled my senses. I realized that the air was unusually still, almost unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. I passed a fallen log where moss had grown thick, a small cluster of mushrooms that seemed to glow faintly. Under the dimming light, I told myself it was just the last rays of sun, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching the way you feel watched when you're alone and something knows exactly where you were at. The first mile was easy enough with the trail winding gently up and around a rocky rise. The further I went, the quieter it became. Not the quiet of an empty forest, but the quiet that presses down on you like a weight. I thought I saw movement just at the corner of my eye, a shadow that darted behind a tree, or maybe it was just a trick of the light. I told myself to calm down, just my imagination, the kind of thing everyone says. They feel scared, but I couldn't shake it. By the time I reached a small clearing, but the trail map called Pine Watch, I could see the sky turning a deep purple, and the first stars beginning to break through the gloom. The air had grown colder and sharper. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I noticed strange markings on the trees here, not natural scratches like bears or elk, but deliberate marks carved deep into the bark. They spiraled in ways that made no sense, like some old code left for someone who understood. He stopped and listened. The wind was still, and I could hear the faintest whispering. It didn't sound like wind at all, like words being carried on the air, soft and sibilant, almost hypnotic. I shook my head, trying to clear it, thinking it must be other hikers or campers somewhere nearby. But the trail was empty and the forest was deep. I felt an itch at the back of my neck, a tingle along my spine, like I was being traced by invisible fingers, deciding it was better to keep moving. I stepped off the clearing and down a narrower path that curved around a bend. The forest here was denser and darker, the pine needles forming a thick carpet underfoot that muffled my steps. Everything felt sharper, more defined. The smell of pine stronger and the shadows darker and somehow more solid than they had been a moment ago. I kept thinking I could hear breathing behind me. Or maybe it was just my own echo, but it made me glance over my shoulder again. And again, then I saw a figure in the distance just ahead on the trail, tall and thin and unmoving. It was dressed in dark clothes that blended almost perfectly with the shadows. It didn't step aside as I approached. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded strange in the quiet, as if it had never been used before. The figure didn't answer, didn't move. I swallowed hard and tried to walk past. And that's when I realized it was staring at me, not with eyes I could see, but with some presence that made my skin crawl and my stomach twist. He stepped back and it didn't move, still watching, still waiting, and the whispering grew louder. Or maybe my mind just imagined it louder, saying things I couldn't understand but felt in my chest and bones. I turned and ran back the way I had come, my breath ragged. The forest around me twisting in ways it hadn't before, the trail seeming longer, darker, and more dangerous. With every step I could hear footsteps behind me, not mine, echoing in perfect rhythm with my own. He reached the clearing again, and the markings on the trees seemed to pulse like they were alive. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears and the shadows stretching toward me, as if reaching for me. The trailhead was just up ahead, the sign barely visible in the dying light, but something in the woods wanted me to stay, and I didn't know if I could leave. I didn't stop running even though my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were on fire. The forest seemed to close in around me, and every shadow looked alive, like it had waited decades for me to arrive. I could hear the whispering clearer, now words curling around me in the cold air, but I couldn't make them out, just a rhythm that felt wrong in my chest. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my pack bouncing against my shoulders, and the trail that had seemed familiar before now felt twisted like a mosaic. Caught a glimpse of the trailhead sign through the trees. I thought I could make it. I thought I could escape whatever was out here. But the moment I stepped into the clearing, the shadows shifted and the air went dead still. The figure I had seen before was gone, but I felt it closer than ever, like it had multiplied and surrounded me, and I couldn't tell front from back, left from right. I dropped my pack to the ground and pressed my hands against my ears to block out the whispers, but it didn't help. It filled my head with 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. I backed up slowly and my foot caught on something solid. I fell hard onto the forest floor, and the dirt smelled strange, like iron and decay. The shadows leaned toward me, and I could see movement in the corners of my eyes, shapes that weren't trees, shapes that weren't animals, shapes that belonged to the forest, and yet weren't alive in the way I understood life. I tried to crawl toward my pack, but my hands felt heavy, like they were sinking into the ground. Whispering now, a chorus in a language older than the mountains themselves. I managed to grab my pack and stumbled to my feet and ran blindly into the trees, not caring if I stayed on the trail. I just wanted out, just wanted the forest to let me go. But the further I ran, the more the forest changed around me. The pines seemed taller, older, and the undergrowth thicker and clawing at my clothes, the moonlight barely reaching the ground. I could hear the creek, but it was wrong now. It was gurgling, moaning like a living thing. I didn't know where I was anymore. Every step felt wrong, like I was walking in circles. Then I saw the cabin, a small structure made of logs with the roof sagging under decades of snow and rot. The windows were dark and empty, but I felt drawn to it like it held answers, or maybe it held more danger. I approached cautiously, my hands shaking and my breath coming in ragged gasps. The door was slightly ajar and I could see nothing inside, but I heard a faint scratching like fingernails against wood that made my stomach twist. I told myself I wasn't going in, that I would keep running, but my feet moved of their own accord inside the cabin. The air was thick with the smell of mold and old pine and something else, something sour and coppery. The floorboards creaked beneath me and I could see shadows in the corners shifting and twisting, and I felt the presence of those things. Watching, waiting, the whispering was louder now. Inside the walls, curling through the cracks in the wood, I could make out a name. My name whispered over and over until it felt like my skull would split. I could see scratches on the walls like something had tried to claw its way out of the cabin, or maybe claw its way back toward the door. The shadows seemed to stretch across the room, reaching for me. I swung the door open, and the forest outside was different again, darker, colder, and endless. I could hear footsteps behind me, and yet when I turned there was nothing there. Only the trees moving in ways that shouldn't be possible, like they were breathing or alive. I ran my mind screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to understand what was happening, but I couldn't. The forest wouldn't let me think straight. He reached a small stream, the water cold and black under the moonlight. I felt the first touch of something brush my shoulder, not with hands, but with a weight, like a presence pressing against my skin. I looked around and I saw figures moving in the trees. Tall, thin shapes that mirrored the trees themselves, but weren't trees. And they watched me with something ancient, something patient and hungry. I splashed water on my face and tried to scream, but my voice came out low and broken, and the shadows recoiled just a little, as if amused. He ran along the stream, following it downhill. The trail seemed to appear beneath my feet like it had never been there before. The forest whispered and twisted. I could hear my heartbeat in the dark, louder than any sound outside. It was the only thing that kept me tethered to reality. And yet even that began to falter as the shapes in the shadows multiplied and moved closer. I knew I couldn't stop. I knew I couldn't rest, because if I did, the forest would take me somewhere ahead. I thought I saw light faint and flickering like a lantern or a fire, and I ran toward it, hoping for safety or another living soul. I had to believe someone had been here recently, or I would go mad. The way the forest was pushing into me, but when I got closer, it was a circle of stones, not a fire, and the stones had markings carved deep into them, the same spirals I had seen on the trees, only bigger, more intricate, and they seemed to pulse under the moonlight like they were alive. The whispering crescendoed into a roar in my mind. I felt myself falling to my knees. Don't know how long I stayed there on the cold ground staring at the stones, but I knew I couldn't leave, or maybe I didn't want to leave, because the forest had my attention and it had my fear. I felt the pull of it deep inside my chest, like a heartbeat, not mine, that was older, deeper, and it wanted me to stay. I forced myself to rise from the cold ground, the stones beneath my hands pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat, not mine, and I felt the forest closing in tight around me. The whispering had changed into a rhythm now, almost musical but wrong, like a Lullaby sung by voices that had never touched the world. I stumbled back toward the trail, but the path seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees bending and twisting into shapes I couldn't recognize. I could feel the eyes of those shapes pressing against me, making my skin crawl. My legs ached and my lungs burned, but I kept moving because the forest had told me I had to. The whispers urging me forward, guiding me deeper into Shadowpine Hollow, where no map would ever take me and no hiker had dared to wander alone. I passed fallen logs that looked like the bodies of giants fallen in battle, and the underbrush seemed to reach for my ankles, trying to pull me down into the dirt. I tried to run, but the forest was patient. It let me breathe, just enough to keep moving. The moonlight flickered through the canopy above. For a moment I thought I saw the figure from before, standing on a ridge watching me. I froze, but it didn't move. It simply observed the way the forest watches, and I felt the weight of that gaze in my chest. I tried to speak, I tried to call out for help, but the sound that came from my mouth was distorted, a low hum that the forest seemed to accept and feed on it like a meal. The shadows around me shifted faster. I could hear the soft crackle of branches like whispers breaking across the ground. I reached a small clearing with a pond, the water black and still reflecting the moonlight in a way that made the forest behind it look upside down. I approached the edge cautiously and saw something in the reflection, not my own face, but a shape tall and thin, staring back at me with hollow eyes that burned into me. I stumbled back and fell, and the whispers became louder now, almost deafening, saying things I couldn't understand but felt in my chest and bones like a language older than time. I scrambled to my feet and ran around the pond, trying to find the trail again, but the forest had erased it. I was in a place that felt both familiar and impossibly alien, and every step I took seemed to echo into the darkness with 1,000 other echoes not my own. The wind began to pick up and the trees moaned in a rhythm like a heartbeat that wasn't mine, and I felt the pull of it deep in my chest, guiding me towards something I didn't want to find. Then I saw the cabin again, the same one from before, but different somehow. The logs darker and twisted, and the windows glowing faintly with a light that felt alive. I knew I shouldn't go inside. I knew I should run, but my legs carried me toward it, like I was being guided by the forest itself. The door was open wider this time, and the scratching inside was louder, almost frantic, like something was trapped or waiting to be released. I hesitated at the threshold, and my mind screamed at me to turn back, but I stepped in anyway. The cabin was alive with shadow, the walls shifting and stretching, and the whispering a chorus now filling every inch of space. The floorboards seemed to pulse like they had a heartbeat, and I could feel something crawling beneath them, something watching from under the boards. I took a step back and felt the shadows reach for my legs, being around them like smoke, and I stumbled forward into the center of the room where the air was thick and heavy and smelled like iron and pine. An old decay looked up and saw the ceiling had markings carved deep into the beams, spirals like the stones outside, and the trees along the trail, the symbols moving slowly like they were breathing. I could hear whispers repeating my name over and over, louder and louder, until it was all I could hear, and I felt myself tilting backward, as if the forest was pulling me into the ceiling, the walls, the very Air around me, the shadow in the corner shifted, and I could swear it was smiling. I felt a pull from it stronger than gravity, stronger than my own fury, stumbled backward, and fell through the cabin door, and the forest outside had changed again. The trees were impossibly tall, and the shadows thicker and darker, and the path forward unclear. I could see shapes moving in the darkness around me, some tall, thin, and humanoid, others twisted and alien, and I knew they were all watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The whispering continued, calling me deeper into Shadowpine Hollow, into a place I didn't understand and couldn't escape from. He ran blindly, following a sound that I thought might be water, but was more like a chant or a song sung in the wind. The forest around me seemed to shift with every step, like it was alive and moving with me, and I realized the trail had disappeared entirely. The only thing guiding me now was the pull in my chest, the whispering in my head, the heartbeat in the ground beneath my feet, and I ran knowing that whatever followed me would not wait forever. Somewhere ahead I thought I saw a faint glow through the trees. First real light I had seen in what felt like ours. I ran toward it, desperate for safety, and when I reached it I found a circle of mushrooms glowing faintly with a cold blue light. The forest around me was quiet now, almost listening. I realized the shapes had stopped following me, but their eyes were still. They're watching from the darkness beyond the light. I didn't know if it was safe or just another trick, but I needed to stop for just a moment to breathe. I knelt among the mushrooms and felt their cold light wash over my hands and face, and for a moment the whispering stopped and I felt like I could think again. But then I heard the footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and I knew the forest wasn't done yet. Whatever was following me had been patient and would not give up until it had me entirely. I stayed low among the glowing mushrooms, feeling the cold light seep into my skin, and the forest around me pressing closer. The whispers had stopped, but the weight of them lingered like a shadow on my chest. I could hear the leaves rustling softly, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, and the footsteps behind me grew louder with each passing second, like someone walking just at the edge of the light. He forced myself to stand and move slowly toward the faint glow I had seen earlier. My hands brushed against the pine needles, and the bark of the trees felt rough and alive. I could feel every groove and not under my fingers. The forest testing me, the forest knowing me in ways that made my skin crawl. I kept my eyes on the glow ahead because it was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that told me I could survive this. The glow led me to a fallen stone bridge over a narrow stream, the water black, reflective and moving like it had a life of its own. I hesitated at the edge, and the whispering returned, not with the words, but with the vibration in the air that shook my chest. It was calling me forward, daring me to cross to the other side. I knew instinctively I shouldn't, but my legs carried me anyway, because the pull in my chest wouldn't let me stop. As I stepped onto the stones, the bridge seemed longer than it should have been, and the water beneath it deeper and darker. I could hear something moving below the surface, something large and slow. Watching, I tried to keep my balance and not look down, but I couldn't help it. And the reflection of the forest in the water was wrong, twisted like it had its own life in it. I saw not my reflection, but a tall figure standing behind me, with eyes that burned cold and empty. I spun around, and there was nothing there. Yet the presence remained like a hand pressing against my spine across the bridge. As fast as I could and stumbled onto the trail beyond, but the forest here was even. Darker, thicker, the trees growing in unnatural angles, and the ground uneven with roots like fingers trying to grab at my boots. I could hear whispers again, soft, deliberate, like someone speaking directly into my ear, saying words I didn't understand. But that made me ache inside my chest. I ran, and the forest seemed to rearrange itself around me the way it wanted. Then I saw it, a cabin, smaller than the first one, but older, the logs blackened and twisted like charred wood. And the door opened just enough to peer inside. I could see shadows moving along the walls. The faintest hint of eyes glowing in the corners. I wanted to turn away to run back, but the forest had me, and I could feel its pull stronger than gravity. It whispered that answers were inside, and that fear was only the first step. Stepped inside the cabin slowly, my boots crunching against the old floorboards, and the air thick with the smell of pine resin. And the walls were covered with more carving spirals and lines that seemed to move. When I looked away, the shadow in the corner shifted as I entered, and I felt it watch me with a hunger that made my skin crawl. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat, and the whispers returned louder now, circling me from every direction. In the center of the cabin was a small table with a single candle burning with an unnatural blue flame. I approached it cautiously and saw a notebook open on the table with pages yellowed and brittle. The writing inside was in a language I didn't know yet. Somehow I understood it, like the forest had given me comprehension for just a moment. Each page detailed the names of hikers and travelers who had come to Shadowpine Hollow before me and never returned. I could feel the weight of their fears still lingering in the air. I heard a step behind me and spun around. The shadow in the corner had moved closer, taller now, stretching toward the ceiling with long, thin arms that didn't bend right. I stumbled back and tripped over a loose floorboard, and it moved faster toward me. I could feel the cold air press against my face like fingers brushing my skin. I grabbed the notebook and ran for the door, and the forest outside swallowed me instantly. The trees pressing in and the shadows twisting around me like smoke. I ran without knowing where I was going, the forest rearranging itself with every step. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy, and the whispering followed me, guiding me deeper into the heart of Shadowpine Hollow. I could feel the pull of something older, stronger, and hungrier than anything I had known. I could hear branches cracking behind me, and I knew the shadow had followed me out of the cabin, but I couldn't turn around. I stumbled into another clearing and saw the glow again, faint but steady this time. From a cluster of stones arranged in a spiral pattern, the whispering stopped as I stepped into the circle, and I felt the weight on my chest lift just a little, like a hand releasing me. I knelt in the center and tried to catch my breath, and the forest held its silence, and for the first time I thought maybe I could survive this night in Shadowpine Hollow. But then the wind shifted and carried a new whisper, not soft this time, but sharp and deliberate. My name spoken slowly, the way a predator savors a word before striking. I felt my blood run cold, and the air thicken around me, and I knew that the forest was not done with me, not yet. Whatever followed me would not rest until it had claimed me entirely. I stayed in the center of the spiral stones for a long moment, listening to the forest breathe around me, the cold light from the mushrooms, and the candle in the cabin fading in my mind. But leaving the air thick and heavy, the whispering had stopped. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave my chest. I could hear the rustle of leaves above, and the shifting of shadows around the edges of the clearing like they were circling me, waiting for me to make a mistake. He stood slowly, my hands brushing tops of the stones, and felt a vibration through my fingertips like a heartbeat not my own. The pull in my chest had returned stronger, and I knew it was calling me deeper into the forest. The trail was gone again, erased like it had never existed, and the trees around me twisted into shapes I couldn't recognize, with branches reaching out like arms and roots curling like snakes. Along the forest floor, I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself, but the air felt thick and electricity started moving in the direction I thought the cabin had been, the forest guiding me, with subtle pressure in the air and the whispering returning faintly like wind through the trees. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my boots catching on the uneven ground. I could feel the eyes of the forest on me every step I took. The shapes and the shadows shifted as I passed, and I felt the presence of something taller, thinner, older than the trees themselves, following close behind me like it had been there the entire time. I reached a small creek that cut through the forest, the water black and reflective, and moving slow as if it had weight. The reflection of the trees was twisted in the water. I saw the shadow again, standing on the far bank, staring at me. Its eyes weren't human, and I felt a shiver travel down my spine. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I tried to step back, but the roots at my feet seemed to reach for me, pulling me toward the creek, and I had to force myself free before the water-claimed meth trail reappeared faintly on the other side of the creek. I ran across the stones, wet and slippery, trying to keep my balance. The forest seemed to bend around me now, the branches twisting and forming shapes like faces, watching me, and I could hear the whispering circling in my ears again, saying words I didn't understand, but feeling every syllable in my chest. The shadow moved faster with every step I took, and I could feel it closing. The distance stumbled into another clearing, this one smaller and darker, the ground uneven with roots and rocks. The moonlight barely reached the forest floor, and the air smelled of pine resin and iron. I could see faint carvings in the bark of the trees here, similar to the spirals I had seen before, but this time the lines were deeper, older, and pulsing with faint blue light like the mushrooms. The whispering was louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel it vibrating through my skull. In the center of the clearing was a small mound of dirt like a grave, and I felt the pull in my chest stronger than ever. It was calling me to kneel there, to place my hands on the soil, and I obeyed without thinking. As if the forest had my mind now, I could feel something moving beneath the surface, pulsing and shifting like it had been waiting for me for decades. The whispering coalesced into a single voice, clear and deliberate. My name said slowly, reverently, and I felt my knees give way, fell to the ground, and the shadows around me deepened, the trees stretching higher and bending closer as if to watch me more closely. The air grew colder and the forest silent, except for the slow, deliberate rhythm of a heartbeat that was not my own. I felt hands like wind brush across my skin. I realized the forest wasn't touching me physically, but spiritually somehow pulling at me at my very soul. Suddenly the mound broke open a faint glow spilling upward, and I saw shapes moving beneath the dirt, tall, thin, and writhing like snakes. In shadows combined, I tried to look away, but my eyes were drawn to it as if I had no choice. The whispering became words I understood now, names of hikers lost over decades whispered to me in a mournful tone, warning me and guiding me. At the same time, I realized the forest held them all here, trapped between the trees and the soil. Their fear and life feeding the forest's hunger. Tried to stand, but the forest pressed down on me again, heavier and heavier, until I fell forward into the mound and felt cold dirt against my hands. I felt the shadow above me, like a weight on my chest, and the whispering turned into a roar, telling me to stay and become one with the forest. The pulsing light in the mound grew brighter. I felt my mind slipping into a place I couldn't control, my heartbeat sensing that the rhythm of the trees and the shadows around me ripped my hands free and scrambled backward, the forest shifting violently as if in anger. The shadow shrieked, though it made no sound, and the trees bent closer, almost touching me with branches like fingers. The air burned in my lungs, and I realized I had to run or I would be trapped here forever, with the forest taking me body and soul. I stumbled toward a faint trail leading away from the clearing, ignoring the whispers and shadows that tried to pull me back. I ran blindly deeper into Shadowpine Hollow, the forest rearranging itself around me, each step bringing me closer to something unknown yet terrifying. I could hear my own breathing and footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm with shapes I couldn't see moving behind and beside me. The forest wasn't just alive, it was aware, and it wanted me to understand that leaving was not an option. The whispering followed me every step, urging me toward the center of its darkness, where I knew I would face the forest itself. I ran through the forest, branches scraping my arms and roots tangling my boots. The whispering now a steady chorus echoing in my mind. I knew that the forest was alive with memory and hunger. The trees seemed to lean inward, bending unnaturally toward me, as if guiding me to some place I wasn't meant to see. Every step I took made the ground beneath me shiver like it had a pulse, and the shadows moved in time with me, circling, watching, waiting. Path opened slightly into a shallow valley, the moonlight pooling like silver water in the center, but failing to penetrate the thick canopy. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and something metallic, faint and sharp. I could feel it in my throat, in the pit of my stomach. The same presence that had followed me from the cabin, now pressing close like a living weight. Wanted to scream, but the forest had stolen my voice, and all I could hear was the echo of the whisper. She stumbled across a fallen tree that formed a natural bridge over a chasm. Drop invisible in the shadows below. The moss was slick under my palms as I crawled across. I felt the brush of unseen fingers along my back, cold, deliberate, as if counting my heartbeat and measuring my fear. The valley seemed endless, and the shadowed shapes in the trees stretched taller as I passed, their limbs bending unnaturally, their eyes glinting with faint, impossible light. Ahead I saw a circle of stones, larger and older than any I had seen before, half buried in the forest floor and carved with spirals and sigils deep enough to catch the faint moonlight like dark water. I approached cautiously, and the whispers rose in my head, forming words I could almost understand, names of those who had entered Shadowpine Hollow and never left, their voices now part of the forest, warning, beckoning. Feeding the presence I could feel pressing closer, I reached out and touched one of the stones, and felt a vibration travel up my arm like the heartbeat of the forest itself. The shadows deepened, coalescing in corners and between trees, stretching toward me, pulsing in rhythm with the stone beneath my fingertips. The whispering surged into a roar. My name repeated, twisted with other voices I didn't recognize but felt in my bones, and I realized the forest had known I would come and had prepared itself for me. Stumbled back, tripping over roots and loose earth, and the shadows followed, drifting silently over the ground and weaving through the trees like smoke. The valley walls seemed to lean inward and the air grew thick, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. I realized the forest didn't just want me to be afraid, it wanted me to surrender. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavier, sluggish, and the whispering was now inside my chest, in my bones, telling me to kneel, to stay, to join what had waited so long for Meth. And the ground trembled beneath me, the vibration spreading outward through the valley and into the roots and stones. I saw movement in the trees above, shapes that moved without branches or leaves, but somehow alive, watching from the canopy, descending slowly. Intentionally, the air was filled with the scent of damp earth, pine, and something older, something rotting and sweet all at once, making my stomach churn and my mind really ran blindly into the shadows, ignoring the uneven ground and the roots that tore at my boots, hearing footsteps behind me that weren't mine but matched my pace perfectly. I knew I was being hunted, not for sport, not for curiosity, but because the forest needed me. It wasn't a predator in the conventional sense. It was older, patient, alive with memories and hunger and a rhythm I could feel pulsing in my veins. The whispering grew louder as I entered another clearing, smaller and more intimate than the last, with a pool of black water at its center reflecting the twisted shapes of the trees. The shadows surrounding it seemed to pulse and stretch as if breathing, their edges flickering in and out of perception. I realized the pool wasn't water, it was a mirror of the forest itself, and whatever dwelled within it was waiting for me to look. He approached cautiously, trying to breathe evenly, my hands shaking, my pulse thrumming in my ears, and in the reflection I saw not myself but a tall, thin figure standing behind me, its eyes deep voids, and a grin that stretched impossibly wide across a face that shouldn't exist in this world. I spun round, but the clearing was empty save for the twisting trees and the whispering that now seemed to seep into the very soil beneath. My hinge pull and my chest grew unbearable, urging me closer to the pool, and I realized the forest wasn't just alive, it was a living memory of every traveler it had consumed, every fear it had nurtured, every shadow it had created to haunt the edges of the trail. I wanted to step back, wanted to run, but my body moved forward as if drawn by invisible cords, and the whispering promised something I couldn't name, something terrifying and irresistible. I reached the edge of the pool, feeling the cold air rise from its surface, the reflection flickering and twisting like smoke. and I heard the names again, all of them calling me, welcoming me, warning me. I dropped to my knees and felt the forest pressing down around me. The shapes in the trees bending closer, the whispers forming words I could understand. Stay with us. Stay with us. Join us in the hollow of time and shadow. We wanted to scream, to run, to break free. But the forest had me now, its pulse thrumming. In my chest, the shadows weaving closer. I knew the night in Shadowpine Hollow had only just begun, and I had already become part of its rhythm. I stayed on my knees at the edge of the black pool, the reflection trembling and twisting beneath the faint moonlight. I felt the forest wrap around me like a living shroud. The whispering was all I could hear now, names and half-words and syllables older than the trees themselves curling in my mind, and I felt the shapes and the shadows leaning closer, stretching toward me, patient and deliberate. When I finally forced myself to stand, the air shifted, heavy and thick, pressing in on me from all sides. The shadows were taller, darker, more defined than before, reaching across the clearing and into the forest beyond. I could feel their weight pressing on my shoulders and the pull in my chest, urging me deeper into the hollow. I stumbled forward, following some invisible path that my mind refused to comprehend, yet my body obeyed. Branches clawed at my clothing and face like the forest itself was testing me. Roots twisted around my boots as I tried to keep my balance, the whispering now, a rhythm pulsing through the air, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat the farther I went. The darker it became, the canopy above closing in. The moonlight reduced to thin slivers that barely illuminated the twisted shapes ahead. Came across a grove of ancient pines, their trunks gnarled and blackened, spirals carved deep into the bark glowing faintly blue in the darkness. The forest seemed alive. Here, the air vibrating with the pulse of something older than any living thing. I could feel it in my bones, in my skin, the rhythm of the hollow pressing on me, guiding me to the center, warning me and tempting me at the same time. Then I saw the first movement in hours, a shadow detaching from the trees, tall and thin, more solid than the others. Its form flickering like smoke and flame, the whispering turned into words, deliberate, calling my name softly but urgently, and I felt my knees give out for just a second. My heart hammering in my throat, my hands trembling, and I knew the forest wanted me to see it, to acknowledge it, to understand. Edie stumbled backward into another clearing, this one smaller, with a circle of stones surrounding a hollow filled with black water. I recognized the pattern from before. Spirals carved in stone and earth, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The shadows hovered just beyond, tall and patient, and the whispering filled my mind with names, with stories, but warnings that I could not fully understand, yet felt in every nerve and fiber of my banked figure. Appeared again, emerging from the trees, taller than any man, thinner than any tree, its eyes voids, its grin stretching impossibly wide across a face that should not exist. I wanted to run, but my body refused to obey. The forest had me, my mind, my fear. My pulse intertwined with its rhythm, and the shadow moved closer, silent but deliberate, guiding me toward the hollow at the center of the stone. As he approached the edge of the water, the cold air rising from its surface like breath, the reflection flickering and twisting, showing not me but every traveler who had ever entered Shadowpine Hollow before me. I could see their faces, pale, frightened, eternal, and the whispering became louder, telling me to join them, to surrender to the hollow, to become part of the forest. To stop resisting, she fell to my knees again, my hands touching the smooth, cold stones. The shadows bending closer, their edges flickering like smoke in the wind. The pull in my chest was unbearable, urging me forward into the hollow, into the water, into the memory of the forest itself. I tried to think, to resist, but every thought was replaced by the rhythm of the forest, the whispering names, the pulse in the air. Cold breath of shadows brushing my skin. Suddenly I felt a hand, not a hand, but a presence, deliberate and cold, press against my back, and I stumbled forward into the hollow. At the center of the stones, the black water seemed to rise to meet me, cold and alive, and the whispers formed into a chorus, welcoming me, claiming me, integrating me into the pulse of the forest. I could feel it threading into my mind, threading into my body, binding me to Shadowpine Hollow. I fell into the water, or perhaps the forest claimed me without any real motion, and the world tilted and shifted. The reflections of the trees and shadows became all around me, pressing into my senses, the whispers now a single, coherent voice telling me the forest never forgets, never releases, never forgives those who enter, become part of it, part of the memory, part of the rhythm. And I could feel the pulse taking me, entwining with my heartbeat, my breath. I very vainly tried to scream, but the voice of the forest filled my lungs, the shadows pressing in, my body no longer my own, and I realized with a cold clarity that I was no longer separate from Shadowpine Hollow. I was part of it now, part of the hollow, part of the whispering, and the shapes around me weren't watching anymore. They were me, and I was them, bound together in the pulse of the force. They stumbled out of the hollow, or perhaps emerged into it in a different way, and the shadows bent closer, waiting, welcoming, patient, eternal. The moonlight no longer mattered, and the forest pulsed around me, alive and aware, knowing and remembering. I understood that there would be no escape, no path back, no trail that led to the world I knew. Only the hollow, only the pulse, only the whispers, and I had become part of its memory. I moved through the forest, but it no longer felt like movement in the usual sense. The shadows and trees bent round me, guiding me, pulling me deeper into Shadowpine Hollow, as if I had no choice, and I could feel the pulse of the forest threading through my body with every heartbeat, every step I took. The whispering grew louder and clearer, names and stories folding into my mind, like I had known them forever. Yet never before. The trail I had once known was gone, replaced with twisted roots, earth that seemed to breathe beneath my boots. The trees leaned closer and stretched taller, and the air was thick, almost viscous with anticipation. I could feel eyes everywhere, some in the dark recesses of the forest, some in shapes I couldn't comprehend, and they followed me, patient, deliberate, eternally. Stumbled into another clearing, smaller and darker than before, the moonlight barely piercing the thick canopy. The shadows seemed to hover at the edge, bending, waiting, their forms flickering between tree and creature. I could feel them watching me, measuring me, and the pull in my chest urged me forward, toward a low mound of earth at the center. The whispering intensified. I realized with a cold certainty that this place was the heart of the hollow. I knelt at the mound and the cold of the earth pressed against my palms. The forest pulsing beneath and around me, the whispers formed coherent words, telling me names of travelers long forgotten and those who had surrendered here. The forest wanted me to understand its rhythm, to integrate me into its pulse, and I could feel the shapes leaning closer, stretching over me like a living canopy. The shadows brushing against my skin, pressing into my Mindy, fell forward into the mound as if drawn. My hands sinking into the soil and the shadows bending closer. Black water of the hollow shimmered faintly nearby, reflecting not my image but those of travelers trapped forever within the forest. The whispering became a roar inside my head, telling me to stop resisting, to kneel and accept, to become one with the hollow, and I could feel the pulse threading through my veins, through my bones. Synchronizing with my heartbeat, he tried to pull back, to run, but my body refused, obeying the rhythm of the forest. Instead, the shadows wrapped around my legs and arms like smoke, their edges cold, deliberate. I could hear the names of those who had entered before me whispering in my ears, beckoning, warning, guiding, claiming the mound beneath me pulsed with energy older than the mountains, and I realized that I had been drawn here for the forest itself. There grew heavier, the moonlight twisting into slivers between the thick branches. The black water rose slowly, as if alive, rippling without wind, reflecting the twisted shapes around me. The shadows in the clearing became taller, bending closer, stretching toward me with patience and intent. I could feel their presence in my chest and my bones, in every fiber of my being. I knew that resistance was meaningless. The forest was patient, ancient, alive, and it had claimed me. Let myself fall fully into the rhythm. Pulse of the hollow threading into my mind, threading into my heartbeat, threading into the very breath I drew. The whispers became coherent, forming sentences I could understand. Welcome, welcome to the hollow. Become one, surrender. Join us. The forest remembers, the forest waits. The forest takes. Those words echoed through the clearing. I could feel the presence of the shadows merging with my own awareness. He rose slowly, the forest guiding me, the whispers threading through my thoughts. I realized that my fear had changed. It was no longer panic, but awe and understanding. The hollow's rhythm integrating into me, teaching me its memory and its hunger. I could see the shapes around me now, not as threats, but as part of a pattern, a network of shadows and whispers and pulse, all part of Shadowpine Hollow, and I was part of it too. The mound pulsed beneath my hands, and the hollow's black water shimmered with faint blue light. I could feel the names of the lost travelers within me, their fear and memory feeding the rhythm, and the shadows leaning closer in acceptance. I breathed the forest and it breathed me in a symbiosis older than time. The whispers wrapping around me like a cocoon of understanding and inevitability. Stepped back from the mound and the shadows shifted with me, patient and deliberate, guiding me through the clearing. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, the trail gone, replaced with twisted roots and shapes that bent toward me, waiting for the next step, the next pulse, the next surrender. The whispers had become a rhythm now, a heartbeat older than anything I had known, threading through me and making with Shadowpine Hollow, I knew then that I could not leave and that the forest would not release me. I had become part of it, integrated into its pulse and memory. And the shadows were no longer separate from me, but extensions of my own awareness. The hollow had claimed me fully, and the forest waited patiently for the next traveler to wander into its embrace. I walked deeper into the forest, but it no longer felt like walking. The shadows bent round me, stretching, coiling, moving with a purpose I could feel in my bones. The trees were impossibly tall, their branches twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend, and I realized the forest itself was aware of me, aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every tremor of fear I had left behind. The pull in my chest guided me to a clearing larger than any I had seen. The moonlight barely penetrating the canopy above, the black water of the hollow shimmered at its center, the surface alive with faint ripples as if something beneath it was moving, waiting. Patient and deliberate, the whispering was a roar in my mind now. Names, stories, warnings, promises all interwoven into a rhythm I could feel pulsing through my veins. I approached the edge of the water cautiously and saw shapes beneath the surface, moving in impossible ways, twisting and writhing like smoke and shadow. I could see faces, pale and frozen with fear from those who had entered before me. I realized they were a part of the forest now, integrated into its memory, and their whispers were my guide as much as my warning. The rhythm of the hollow threaded through my heartbeat, my breath, my awareness, pulling me closer and closer. Then I felt it behind me, a presence so cold and deliberate that the hair on my arm stood straight up. The tall shadow I had glimpsed earlier emerged from the trees, more solid, more menacing, its eyes voids, its grin impossibly wide and deliberate. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. The forest had me fully, my body and mind now intertwined with its pulse and its hunger. The whispering became words I could understand clearly. Join us fully, surrender to the hollow, become one with the forest. The memory, the pulse, I felt the pull in my chest stronger. Then gravity urging me forward toward the water, toward the shadows, toward the hollow itself. I stumbled closer, hands brushing the cold, rippling surface of the black water, and I realized there was no escape, not now. Not ever. The shadows bent closer, intertwining with my own awareness. My heartbeat sensing with theirs, the rhythm of the forest pulsing through every fiber of my being. I could hear the names of the lost travelers whispering in my ears, welcoming me, warning me, claiming me, and I felt my mind splitting between fear and understanding. The hollow teaching me its memory, its hunger, its inevitability knelt at the water's edge, and the pulse of the forest pressed through me like a tide, the whispers rising and falling in cadence with my heartbeat. The black water shimmered and the reflection of the trees twisted impossibly, showing not me but every shadow, every shape, every traveler integrated into the hollow. For centuries the whispering told me to kneel, to lay my hands on the soil, to surrender fully. I obeyed without thought, every nerve alive with the forests. With me fell forward into the hollow at the center of the pool, the black water cold, alive. Pressing against me, the shadows rose and bent round me, keeping me in their rhythm, and the pulse of the forest threaded into my mind, threading into my chest, threading into my soul. I felt my awareness stretch outward, connecting with every tree, every root, every shadow in Shadowpine Hollow. I realized I was no longer separate from it. I had become part of its memory, part of its rhythm, part of its pulsed whispering formed into a single voice, calm, deliberate, older than time. Welcome, welcome to the hollow. The forest remembers, the forest waits. The forest takes. I felt the names of all who had come before me flowing into me, their fear and memory integrating, their whispers guiding me to understand the rhythm of Shadowpine Hollow fully. The black water pulsed beneath my hands. I felt the shadows bend closer, patient, deliberate, eternally rose slowly from the hollow, or perhaps the hollow rose through me, and the forest pulsed in synchrony with my heartbeat. I could feel the whispers, threading through my mind and body, guiding me, teaching me, claiming me fully. I was part of Shadowpine Hollow now. The shadows no longer separate from me, but extensions of my own awareness. Black water no longer separate, but a reflection of my pulse, my breath. My banked forest was alive, aware, hungry, and patient. I understood that this was the way of Shadowpine Hollow, that those who entered became part of its memory, part of its rhythm, part of its pulse, and I was now one with it, bound forever to the whispers, the shadows, the black water, and the heartbeat of the forest itself. I moved through Shadowpine Hollow with a rhythm I had never known, yet had always felt. The forest pulsed through me, the whispers threading into my mind, my heartbeat sensing with the shadows. Black water, the soil, the very air around me. I was no longer separate from the hollow. I was part of it, bound by pulse, memory, and rhythm. Every thought and breath intertwined with the force that trees leaned closer, their branches twisting and bending like arms stretching toward me. Yet I no longer feared them. The shadows moved in harmony with me, patient and deliberate, guiding my steps. Being around me in a rhythm I could feel in every bone. The hollow had claimed me fully, and I understood that fear was irrelevant now. That resistance was a memory, that surrender was the path forward. He came across the largest clearing yet, a circle of black water, surrounded by spiraling stones carved with ancient sigils glowing faintly in blue moonlight. The shadows hovered at the edges, bending and pulsating. I realized this was the heart of Shadowpine Hollow. The whispers surged into a singular voice, older than the mountains, calling my name, guiding me toward the center, promising understanding and eternity. Step forward into the center, cold air brushing my skin like a touch that was not human yet deliberate, and the black water shimmered, reflecting not my face but every traveler lost to the hollow. The whispering was a chorus now, names and stories flowing through me, merging with my thoughts, my breath, my heartbeat. And I felt the pull stronger than ever, urging me to kneel, to surrender fully, to integrate complete till you fell to my knees at the water's edge and felt the pulse of the forest threading through me, the shadows bending closer, intertwining with my awareness. The black water rippled alive. I realized the hollow was not just a place, but a consciousness older than any living thing, patient, eternal, hungry, and now I was part of it, part of its memory, part of its rhythm. Inseparably, the whispers formed a single coherent sentence that resonated in my mind. Welcome to the hollow. You are part of us. You are part of the forest. The forest remembers. The forest waits, the forest takes, and in that moment, I felt the boundaries of myself dissolve into the forest. Pulse of the hollow filling my mind and body, every thought, every breath, every heartbeat absorbed into its rhythm rose slowly, though not truly rising, for my body had become part of the hollow. The shadows stretched taller, bending closer, patient, deliberate. I felt the black water at the center calling me fully into its memory. The whispering guided me forward, and I understood then that I would never leave Shadowpine Hollow, that I had become part of its eternal pulse, part of its sentient memory, part of its hunger. The forest around me shifted, bending, breathing, alive in a way I could feel in every nerve and fiber of my being. The shadows moved in perfect harmony with me, guiding me through the trees, the roots, the soil, the air. Every element of the hollow connected to me, and I to it. I was both observer and participant, fear and understanding coexisting. The rhythm of the forest threading into eternity knelt once more at the edge of the black water, feeling the pulse of the hollow in my chest, in my mind, in my soul. And I whispered the names I had learned, joining the chorus of voices of those who had entered before me, guiding future travelers, warning them, welcoming them, integrating them into the pulse of Shadowpine Hollow. One, so I became one with the forest, one with the hollow, one with the rhythm, the whispers, the shadows, the black water, the spirals and the trees and stones. I had surrendered fully, and the forest had claimed me forever. Patient, eternal, alive, remembering, waiting, taking. I understood that I had become part of something older, something sentient, something infinite in Shadowpine Hollow.